Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to check in and see if how your audiovisual components were working for today's meeting.
Yeah, hi Nate, thanks for joining. I think
you're welcome.
everything's going okay. Can you just can you let me know what you're seeing? I'm trying to make sure that the attendees can see the screen and then also the person that's speaking, the video of the person that's speaking.
Sure, I can definitely see your screen now. And when I put my view into attendee view, follow hosts view, so I do have that option. Of course, I'm on this side of the fence, so to speak, for the viewing process, kind of behind the scenes. So I'm not sure if they're going to have that option, I guess is what I'm trying to, let's see.
I think you're muted, Rachel.
Oh, whoops. Okay, there we go. Thanks. Yeah, I think people are joining, so I think I'll just assess that as I go. Thanks, Nate.
Oh, you're very welcome. And yeah, I can't see it now. I just had to put my own view into speaker mode, so I have exactly, the person speaking and the slide.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes.
Hello.
Yeah, Dr. Eleke, just hold on. I think we can start now. Should we wait?
Yeah, I think we can get started and we'll allow people will just join as we get going.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar on food prices for nutrition in Nigeria, tracking the cost and affordability of healthy diets. The webinar will be strictly for 1.5 hours, and we're going to start straight away, taking the welcome remarks by Dr. Razak Oyeleke. But before we do that, kindly introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, which country you are joining us from, and your organization. And please use the chat box for your comments, for your observations, but please use the Q&A box for your questions that will be answered by the panelists in due course. My name is Adeyinka Onobolu. I'm the Senior Advisor on Food Security and Nutrition. I am employed by GAIN, but attached to the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Nigeria. You are most welcome. Dr. Oyeleke, over to you for your welcome remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Onobolu Adeyinka. Let me start by extending the goodwill of the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Alhaji Mohammed Abubakar, and that of my permanent secretary, Dr. Enes Umakiri. I also bring the greetings of my director, Federal Department of Agriculture, Ajia Karima Babangida, to all the participants at this very important webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on food prices for nutrition in Nigeria. The webinar is the result of efforts over the past several years to deliberately make the agriculture sector in Nigeria nutrition sensitive. For many decades, the ministry operated under the assumption that ensuring national food security, employment opportunity, and industrial raw material will automatically improve nutrition. However, we started to realize that undernutrition was most prevalent in parts of the country with high food production. The ministry therefore decided that there was a need for institutional arrangements to ensure that nutrition became a priority outcome for agricultural activities. Consequently, the Nutrition and Food Safety Division was established initially as a unit in 2022, but as a division in 2015. So far, the division developed an agriculture sector food security and nutrition strategy, prices and increased affordability of staple and nutrient-rich foods are some of the primary outcomes that this strategy aims to achieve. For many years, it has been thought that ignorance about nutrition in the areas of high food production is the major reason for poor diet and malnutrition. But the Nigerian government has been spending money on nutrition education with little results to show for it. When the Ministry of Agriculture decided to develop a nutrition strategy, we conducted desk reviews that showed us that nutrition education only works if nutritious foods are affordable to people. It was for this reason that we included outcomes around prices and affordability. Our thinking at that time was that reduced prices will automatically mean increased affordability. And so we set targets around price reduction for nutritious food. Our collaboration with the Food Prices for Nutrition project began in 2018. When we approached the project team with a proposal around monitoring the cost of nutritious diets in Nigeria. The webinar today will be talking about what our collaboration has achieved so far, including the work of other partners that have teamed up with us. As you will hear about in the webinar, one of the big lessons we have learned is that achieving lower prices of nutritious foods alone will not ensure affordability. Increasing the affordability of nutritious foods requires changing several aspects of our food system. The Ministry of Agriculture has therefore worked with the Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning to ensure that affordability of nutritious food was included as an outcome indicator of national food systems transformation during the process leading up to the 2021 United Nations Food System Summit. This webinar is the first in the series of webinars that the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development will host to discuss issues around nutrition and food systems transformation in Nigeria. I would like to thank the Food Prices for Nutrition Project, the National Bureau of Statistics, and Wageningen University in partnership with the CGIAR Research Program Agriculture for Nutrition and Health for the progress that has been made thus far in understanding the cost and affordability of healthy diets in Nigeria. Today's webinars would not have been possible without the efforts of these collaborators and stakeholders. So we hope that you will all actively engage in this webinar and join actively in discussions around the importance of our methods, our findings for actions to transform food systems across Nigeria. Again, I want to welcome and thank you for joining this very important webinar. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eleke. We will go straight to the first speaker, Dr. Anna Herforth and Rachel Gilbert of the Food Prices for Nutrition Project at Tufts University. They will be giving an overview of the food prices for nutrition, costs and affordability of a healthy diet metric. Over to you, Anna and Rachel.
Thank you, Dr. Onobulu, and also thank you to Dr. Oyeleke for your wonderful remarks to remind us the importance of what we are discussing today and why we are here. The monitoring of cost and affordability of healthy diets, we believe, will be very important for understanding how to shape food systems for improved nutrition. And it's so wonderful to work together with partners in Nigeria to take action on food systems for nutrition. My name is Anna Herforth, and I'm the co-director of the Food Prices for Nutrition project in Boston. And Rachel Gilbert is here with me on the team as well, the Food Prices for Nutrition team. And we're pleased to give an overview of the metrics we'll be discussing today. The Food Prices for Nutrition project has the main purpose of scaling up monitoring and analysis of food prices to guide agricultural production and food markets for improved nutrition. Exactly what we've heard from the first speaker. And to do this, we aim to support the use of the metrics in high priority countries, of which Nigeria is certainly one, to also build a global system to monitor change in food prices for nutrition. And I'll talk more about that in the coming slides. And then to also analyze the change in cost and affordability of healthy diets and what is affecting that change. So how transformations in food systems or agriculture may be affecting cost and affordability. This is a partnership between Tufts and the World Bank and IFPRI. And in the next slide, we'll tell you about the history. This project has built on work for now 6 years. Previous projects that have developed the price indices we're discussing today and the cost metrics, starting back in 2015 when we started working with partners in Ghana and Tanzania. The Ministries of Agriculture and Trade and other partners who collect food price data regularly. The intention was always to work with the people in countries who are already collecting food price data regularly, such as the National Bureaus of Statistics and other organizations that are variable by country, but that there's abundant food price data available. We just need to look at it in a different way than it has been in the past to understand what it's telling us about access to nutritious food. So we've had, several years of collaboration with many partners in order to get where we are today. Next slide. And our motivation for this whole effort is the understanding that as we strive for food security, healthy diets are still out of reach for many. It's estimated that healthy diets are unaffordable for about 3 billion people globally. And to be accessible, healthy diets must be both available and affordable. And so if our aim is to achieve food security, we need to monitor what it is we want to achieve. Are we able to deliver affordable and healthy diets at each time and place? And so looking at the variation across times and places, as we'll do today, will be very important. Next slide. So our aim here is to understand, if you go to an average market in any country, how much would it cost to obtain a diet that satisfies dietary guidelines, which are meant to provide recommendations for everybody on what is a diet that's healthy, what is a diet that will be nutrient rich and protect health over the long term as well. And then how many people could not afford this cost in order to inform actions. Next. We have also been in collaboration with FAO to provide estimates globally to answer that question in the previous slide on the cost and affordability of healthy diets in the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World reports. So we're very pleased that this metric is now joining other food security metrics to understand this main goal that we're working towards, and which these UN flagship reports are centered on, which is the provision of food security and understanding food security. And previously, discussions about food security have been mostly focused on access to calories or sometimes access to staple grains. And this was not fulfilling the complete aspiration of food security, which going back to the wording that has been used for the last 25 years to articulate this vision is access by all people at all times to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet dietary needs for a healthy and active life. So in order to understand meeting, access to nutritious food to meet dietary needs, this metric of the cost and affordability of healthy diets is very important, joining other metrics, including the prevalence of undernourishment and the food insecurity experience scale. Next slide. So what we have done in this project and in the SOFI reports that were shown on the last slide is to look at the cost of 3 different benchmarks, 3 different diets, and how they're defined is that the first step in this diagram here is, what does it cost just to meet calorie adequacy? And that, of course, is not enough at all for the vision of food security. It's only enough for very short-term subsistence. So then we look at what is the cost of meeting nutrient needs, avoiding deficiencies or excesses of essential nutrients. And then the third step is to look at the cost of healthy diets, which goes beyond nutrient adequacy because it deals with food group recommendations, which are both a behaviorally realistic way for people to choose nutrient adequate diets. And they're also a diet that would protect health against chronic diseases and enable a healthy and active life. So we consider this the minimum benchmark for looking at food security. And then it's important to understand that this is just a minimum cost, that if people have other goals, as everyone does, of convenience or preferences, choosing more preferred items instead of just the least cost items to meet recommendations, that those would raise the cost further. So what we're looking at here is a benchmark of least cost diets, looking at the most affordable, lowest cost combination of foods in markets that meet the criteria for the 3 diets that I just discussed. There's no standard diet, no standard basket of specific foods, because the least cost items will depend on time and place. So even in the same market, you know, in one day, mangoes will be the cheapest fruit. In another day, bananas will be the cheapest fruit. So the items that are actually selected to understand the least cost diet will be variable depending on prices. And so these estimates of the cost of a healthy diet we're talking about today, they really provide a conservative estimate or a lower bound on the cost per day that would be required to obtain that healthy diet, excluding, you know, personal or household preferences and excluding factors like convenience. Today, we'll be talking about the results from looking at household survey data. This came from the 2018-2019 Nigeria Living Standards Survey collected by NBS, National Bureau of Statistics. And this is one source of data that can be used to understand food prices and the access to healthy diets. It is useful because we can look across regions and understand the variation in cost. However, it's only collected at one time point, and so it doesn't tell us about how food prices and access to healthy diets are changing over time. To understand that, we need to rely on other data sources, such as the monitoring data, the CPI monitoring data that's collected for the purpose of monitoring inflation. This is data that's routinely collected by NBS and would be very applicable for monitoring the affordability of healthy diets and how it varies over time. So we hope that this will be the case in the future, that going forward, NBS and other partners in Nigeria will be able to work together using this rich data source to understand the cost of healthy diets and monitor that cost. So both of the sources, the survey data as well as monitoring data, have extensive food items and they cover all states. And then there are sometimes other sources of data that can be used for this analysis as well. One kind of data is, you know, a market information system. There are many types of market information systems, such as the system that World Food Program uses. It varies by country, but WFP is also doing a fill the nutrient gap analysis in Nigeria and using some granular rural data, which can also be used for this type of analysis. Next. So to calculate the cost of a healthy diet, I'll give an overview of the method. It's operationalized as a recommended diet, which is based on quantitative food-based dietary guidelines. And these are published by over 100 countries, not very many in Africa right now. Nigeria does have dietary guidelines, but the dietary guidelines of Nigeria don't specify a number of servings or serving sizes, which is necessary for actually calculating what the recommendations would cost. So in the next slide, what we've used instead is what we call a healthy diet basket. This is an average quantification across different food-based dietary guidelines. So we've looked at many guidelines in the world and taken the average of what's recommended in different food groups. It is consistent with the food groups recommended in Nigeria, but this method gives us a way to quantify the food groups that we are costing and find the cost of the recommended amount of each of these food groups. So you can see that looking at calorie distribution, about half of the recommended healthy diet is in starchy staples, and then we have about a quarter being from protein-rich foods between animal source foods and legumes, nuts, and seeds, and then about 12-13% from oils and fats, and the other 12-13% from vegetables and fruits. And the gram distribution is a bit different, as you can see, because some foods have higher water quantity than others, but this gives us a solid quantification to be able to find the cost of a healthy diet that's recommended. Next. So the steps we follow to calculate this cost are, first of all, to categorize each food in the food price list available according to the food groups of the dietary guideline. So in this case, we're using the global healthy diet basket. And it's again consistent with Nigeria's food groups. So when we take the food price list from either the monitoring data or the household survey data, we would categorize it by food groups. Then we remove items that are just not required. We don't need to add the cost of things like sweets because it's not a required item. It would be an additional item as per preference. And we would remove duplicate items, so only taking the cheapest form of each item, such as the cheapest type of rice, for example. Then calculate the price per day of each item as per the amount that is recommended per day, and then take the average of the least cost items in each food group and sum them to find the total cost. So we end up with a basket that has 11 items because each food group has between 1 and 3 items to ensure adequate diversity. And we would sum the cost of the amounts of each food required to meet the recommended amounts for the entire day for an individual. Next. I wanted to also mention that the cost of healthy diet is appropriate as a monitoring tool. It doesn't need to be just a one-time analysis. Again, we can use monitoring data to regularly calculate it. It's relatively straightforward because, as I just described, it's a matter of finding quantities of food required and the cost of those and simply summing them. So it doesn't require on linear programming, such as is used in other approaches, such as the fill the nutrient gap analysis and other nutrient-based approaches. We do use cost of nutrient adequacy for certain purposes, but in terms of this metric, it doesn't rely on the more complex linear programming needed for those methods. And it also, again, focuses on leveraging the abundance of data that's already collected in existing systems. So going forward, again, we aim to support countries in routinely calculating metrics with their own data systems because we've had this collaboration in Nigeria. Nigeria's far ahead on being able to actually do this with the people here today and the collaborations involved. Next. So before passing it to the next speaker, we'll be discussing not only the cost, but the affordability of a healthy diet. This is a comparison of the cost compared to a defined income standard. And the choice of that income standard depends on what kind of data are available and what the purpose is. In the past, we have used the comparison to international poverty lines quite a lot to emphasize that the cost of healthy diets is far out of reach for people living in poverty. And we can also look at the cost of healthy diets for in comparison to food expenditures or in comparison to income or to wages, depending on what's available. So for the global analysis that's been published in the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World reports, we've used comparisons to income distributions to show the number and percent of people who just don't have sufficient income to be able to purchase a healthy diet. Today, we will hear about the cost and affordability at state level. And I'll stop here and pass it over to Dr. Daniel McConan at Wageningen University and Research to discuss the results. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, so thank you everyone for listening to this webinar. My name is Daniel McConan. I am a researcher at Wageningen Economic Research, Wageningen University and Research. The background information, the methods and the metrics has been described by Anna. So I will need to do that. So I'll just go straight to the results. Maybe I will simply note that this is, I have collaborators who contribute to this work. Next. Yeah, so the objective is to calculate the cost and affordability. So yeah, Anna has already described this. The only thing that I would like to note is that affordability in this study is evaluated with respect to household food expenditures on food. Next, please. The data, okay. We have heard earlier this the Nigeria Living Standard Survey from 2018-19. This is a large survey that covers all states in Nigeria. And then 60 enumeration areas have been covered from every state. And 10 households were interviewed from each enumeration area. So we have over 22,000 households interviewed. But the data from the Borno state was not representative. So it has been excluded from the analysis. This survey has two important modules that are of use to our research. That is a food consumption module and the community survey module. So we have over 110 food items to look into. And we have also price information for all of them from 2,200 markets. So basically the market prices come from a community survey module. So based on this prices information from this, we calculate median prices per state. So that would mean that every person in one state would be facing, that is the assumption, would be facing one price. So based on these prices, we choose food items from the list and then calculate the cost of food item. Next, please. So based on the median prices, the least cost food items were selected according to the 6 food groups. The first one is starchy staples. From this food group, there are about 20 food items, but only 8 of them were selected as low cost in one or the other state, out of which actually only cassava and gari were selected in many of the states. So the least cost food items may not necessarily be the preferred ones. For example, rice, wheat, products, yam were not selected in any of the states, and then millet was selected only in one state. Similar, we can say the same thing about legumes. Beans was not selected at all in any of the states except for Yobe. Next, please. Yeah. I have also above 20 food items for animal source foods, of which 14 of them were selected, but the majority come from cheese and fish and agricultural eggs. All the rest were selected only in one state or so. So meat, for example, was not selected in many of them, except for one state, that is Silesia. Vegetables, okay, we had 6 food items, but all of them were selected, but not necessarily evenly. Next, please. Fruits, that was also good. Oils, the lion's share come from palm oil. Next, please. Yeah. Now, the first results, we calculated the costs of food item, the healthy diet. So on average, the average cost was 2019 Naira per country. That is the minimum cost of healthy, the minimum cost of healthy diet, which is about 89% of the daily per capita expenditures. That is on national average. So based on this metrics, about 31% of households in the country could not afford the cost of healthy diet. So this is a national figure. When we look at state level figures, that might give us more information where majority of households are fall below the cost. Next, please. Yeah, so this is the first state level. States are ranked according to the level of cost of diet. So from this graph, you can see that the ones in red are where the cost is much higher, that is above the 75th percentile. And then the ones in green are where the food is cheaper, that is below the 25th percentile. So status with the highest costs are all in the southern region, specifically southeastern zones. Southeastern status cost is higher in southeastern zones, and also cost is lowest in the northern states. Next, please. In terms of affordability, we have constructed a similar figure as the cost. Here, even though cost was high in the southern states, affordability is also much better in the southern states. So, and then even though cost was lower in the northern states, affordability was not as much in the southern states. So Ebonyi and Lagos happen to be ranked to be the least affordable and the most affordable among Nigerian states. Next, please. So if we bring the two slides, the previous two slides together, you will see that completely some additional information. For example, all the states which have with the highest costs do not necessarily have higher share of households who are unable to afford healthy diet. And then the same is true for states with a lower level of cost. So that's why you don't see the same level of affordability corresponding to the cost. The rate, if higher cost means lower affordability, then the red lines would have been in the same line, but that's not the case. Next, please. We have also looked into cost and affordability by food group and across geopolitical zones. All in all, the cost of animal source food group was high. It was twice the cost of vegetables and also more than 3 times the cost of other food groups. But in general, as I mentioned earlier, cost of healthy diet was higher in the southern states. So that is the figure A. Figure B is rather about the share of households whose expenditures were below the cost of a healthy diet of that food group. So basically it means that what percent of households actually are spending less than what would be needed to afford a healthy diet of that specific food group. So from figure B, we see that over 80% households across all zones spent less on vegetables than the amount needed to meet recommendations, but this figure is also high. The figure is for other food groups, especially fruits and animal source food is also high. Next, please. So we have seen the spending share according to the recommended diet as well as actual expenditure. So you'd see that from the according to the recommendation, we would expect 40% of the cost should be allocated to animal source foods, but actual consumption is actually only 20% of that. And then also vegetables, we would expect 20% of food spending would be allocated to a healthy diet, to vegetables, but in actual spending, only 12%. So it's only the staples food groups that people are actually spending a lot more than actually in excess of what would be needed. So that's basically what these two graphs are telling us. Next, please. Across the states for this is similar graph. So basically, over 90% of households had expenditures below the expenses needed for the recommended quantities. So of which 2/3 of states, households in 2/3 of the states are spending less. And then over 90% of households are spending less on vegetables, less on animal source foods, and less on fruits for about 1/3, 2/3, 1/3, and 1/4 respectively. So households, over 90% of households in each state had adequate or excess spending on starchy staples, except for Imo and Enugu, who are spending about 80% and 75% of their actual spending on starchy staples. Next, please. So just to sum it up, the key findings are that about 31% of households in the country could not afford a healthy diet. That is the main message. Next to that, cost of healthy diet was the lowest in northern states, and cost of healthy diet was the highest in southern states. But in general, healthy diet was relatively affordable in the southern states, Lagos, Oyo, Ondo, and Delta, and then also in some northern states, Benue and Kwara. However, lower food prices may not necessarily lead to higher affordability and vice versa. For example, despite relative influence in southeastern states, the prevalence of unaffordability is highly problematic because of high prices in the southeast. For example, about 41% of households in those states could not afford a healthy diet despite high level of income. Similarly, in northern states, the price of recommended foods were in low to mid-range, yet lack of income makes affordability of healthy diet highly problematic. So next, please. Yeah. So what do we take from the result then? That is for policies and programs to bring healthy diets within reach of the poor, we would need a sub-national level analysis of cost and affordability of healthy diets. So having this information would give decision makers a realistic picture of state level priorities for interventions and for shaping food systems transformation pathways towards healthier diets and mitigate drivers of malnutrition in times of crisis. So that would mean that we'll need monitoring of cost of diets, as well as other indicators which are essential for evidence-based policy making. I stop here. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Olutayo Adeyemi, you have the floor.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm going to be talking about the next steps for monitoring the cost of a healthy diet in Nigeria. Like the speakers before me have already said, the survey that Daniel just presented looks at just one time point. And so the next steps for this work that we are doing is to look at routine data. So we are going to be assessing costs and affordability of a healthy diet using retail food price data from the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. So NBS collects price data from over 10,000 markets across Nigeria every month. And they collect this data to be representative of the rural markets and the urban markets in each of the 36 states, as well as the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what we propose is to, right now we intend to do analysis starting from January 2016 to September 2021. And we will also be looking at income data from other surveys by the National Bureau of Statistics to determine the affordability by state and other socio-demographic characteristics. And so we'll be looking at, so as we look at the price from 2016 to 2021, we'll then compare it with income at different time points across the country. The other thing is that we are working on institutional arrangements with NBS. So NBS, like I mentioned that they collect these prices every month. They use it to calculate the consumer price index and other statistics, and they publish these price bulletins every month where they report some of these findings. So what we are working on is to have this arrangements with NBS so that as they work on other indicators that they report monthly, that they also compute and report on the cost of a healthy diet across all the states, as well as national level and Abuja, and as well as for urban and rural areas within each state. Next slide, please. Okay, and so what we hope to get from this analysis is that we will have data on seasonal and state level trends in cost of a healthy diet. And by this, it means that for each year, so 2016, 2017, like that, we will be able to see the line for each state and Abuja, how prices, the cost of a healthy diet changes month on month across these different locations, and how these costs compare across the different locations, so that we can identify seasonal trends. So are there some months where food prices, or sorry, the cost of a healthy diet is generally high in all states or generally low in all states? Are there some states or area, maybe urban rural area, where even if prices were lower everywhere else, these places will consistently, the cost of a healthy diet will be consistently higher in these places? These are some of the things we want to check. The other thing we want to look at is another output is for each state and the Federal Capital Territory, as well as urban rural within each of these places, to have these lines for each year. So imagine maybe Abia, for instance. So we'll have a graph where the 2016 line month on month for Abia, 2017, 2018, all of that is on one graph, and we can see how the cost of a healthy diet has changed across the months of a year over the last few years for each of these locations. And then also compare this data to the affordability of a healthy diet. And what we hope to achieve with this analysis is to have increased information for decision making. So identifying places in the country that will benefit from different kinds of agricultural policies or intervention, trade policies across states. And we've seen in the past partnerships between states to increase production. Like there was a time that Lekki and, Lagos and Kebbi states partnered together so that rice was produced in Kebbi for Lagos markets to reduce the cost of rice in Lagos, and they came and go Lake rice and all of that. So looking more at how to increase maybe state-to-state collaboration to reduce the cost of a healthy diet. So policies around this is some of the things that we hope that this will inform. And then we also hope that this will inform social protection. There is a lot of argument around social protection in Nigeria. The government has been doing a conditional cash transfer project, and people talk about, oh, the amount is too small. What is this amount going to do? But then there's no information to say what should the amount be. And so by having these kinds of information around how much it will, the cost of a healthy diet in one day, then we can have that for 1 month and then be able to see what should our social protection policies and programs look like. And then we also expect that this will inform other policies or programs to improve the food system for nutrition in Nigeria. One of the things we've realized is that if we were to address post-harvest losses in different ways, and there are different ways we can do that, it has the potential to really bring down the cost of a healthy diet in some places. We also realize that there are other interventions that, so for instance, the road transportation is another thing. So one of the things that research has shown that can increase the cost of a healthy diet is the cost of transportation. For instance, from an area that produce high amounts to, so from areas of surplus to areas of deficit. And so some of the policies or programs that this information can help us make decisions about is where should we be strengthening road networks or other forms of transportation networks, which axis will benefit the most for that, for improved food systems. And transportation is actually one of the action areas for the National Food Systems transformation pathway. So having this information, it's also useful for that sector, as well as some other sectors that will be working on the national pathways to food systems transformation. Next slide, please. Okay, so regarding the uses of this data, so who are the people we expect to use it? So I mentioned that, and we hope that it will be used in decision making. And the 4 group of actors that we are particularly targeting, of course, the government. So we hope that the analysis will be useful to the government around food system transformation, income and wages, trade and social protection, like I already mentioned. And of course, the Ministry of Agriculture realizes the importance of this work, as well as the Bureau of Statistics. And that's why there's this ongoing collaboration with these 2 government institutions. But we expect that other government institutions will also key into this project, like the Ministry of Budget and National Planning is also already doing. Another thing is that we expect the government expects to be able to use this for early warning of food insecurity and malnutrition. So oftentimes we look at food insecurity and malnutrition when people are already experiencing it, or you do a survey and you find out that, oh, people, the prevalence of food insecurity is high here. People are reporting that food consumption is, you assess food consumption and you find out that it's inadequate, or you assess acute malnutrition or other malnutrition indicators and you find out that it's inadequate. So what monitoring the cost of a healthy diet can do for us is that once you start to see that there's an increasing trend in the cost of a healthy diet, that before the situation progresses to more serious manifestations of food insecurity, like people actually starting to go hungry and increases in the rates of malnutrition, you can actually start to act to address the situation to bring down the cost of a healthy diet. Research already shows that when the cost of a healthy diet is high and unaffordable, then malnutrition is going to be high. So having that information can help the government mitigate a situation before we have even worse levels of malnutrition. Then for development partners and civil society, relatedly, these organizations often target interventions and beneficiaries based on outcomes such as stunting or acute malnutrition and food insecurity. But having an intermediate indicator or outcome on the pathways to these more severe situations can help development partners and civil societies to better target their interventions. The other thing is that organizations often have areas of expertise that they want to concentrate on. So some in the agriculture sector, for instance, you can have organizations supporting the inputs for production. Some will support maybe market access and post-harvest management, and some support other things, backward integration with industry, things like that. Having this information can help organizations decide what particular interventions they are going to support and which parts of the country they are going to support. The other group of people that this information will be useful for is the private sector. And so the gaps, so where you have the cost of a healthy diet prohibitively high, and you have other areas where it's very low within the same country, and it's not like there are trade restrictions across the country. It signals that there are very serious inefficiencies within the national food system, and the private sector is the main actor in the food system. It's the private sector that is the biggest actor in getting food across the food system, from the production to the consumers. And so having this information can help private sector identify places where there are supply gaps and then start to innovate around solutions to these supply gaps. The fourth group of people that we expect this information to be useful for is the academia and research community. And so we talk a lot. Malnutrition is high in Nigeria. Nigeria has one of the highest burdens in West Africa, and even globally. But a lot of the indicators we've had to study malnutrition has been predominantly around the health sector, because a lot of the sector that has been surveys that have been conducted are conducted in the health sector. And so we have had very relatively few or little information from the food security and food consumption aspects of malnutrition. And so having this, the work we are doing, the findings from this work can help the research community to better understands the drivers of healthy diets in Nigeria, can help the research community to understand food systems challenges. I mean, based on what Anna and Daniel explained before me, you can see how the cost of the healthy diet is related to the larger food system. And then can also help the academia and research community to study the effects of policies and programs. For instance, our social protection programs, our agriculture programs, trade policies, and things like that. And so we expect that all of these different groups of stakeholders, as well as maybe other stakeholders we haven't thought about, will look forward to and perhaps reach out to us regarding this work, so that we can have a comprehensive approach to addressing food systems challenges in Nigeria. Over.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. Now we have come to the point where people can ask their questions. I see only 3 questions in the Q&A box, and it's like everything is addressed to Tayo. So someone says, I guess the food prices are also annualized based on seasonal availability and attendance price variation. So that person wants a confirmation. And also in this proposal and for the next line of analysis, could you equally factor in data relating to food vendors' activities and how this impacts affordability? And the same person that asked the first question asks further, what role does food preservation techniques and post-harvest loss reduction strategies help with stabilizing food prices? So Tayo, I think you should take all those while we look for others.
Okay, thank you very much everyone for the questions, for those who have asked questions. Regarding the food prices, so I am assuming this is the prices from MBS. I don't know, I'm not sure I understand what the person means by annualized, but basically NBS has enumerators, I think, in every ward of the country. And so they collect the data every month. They collect and report the data every single month of the year. And so the prices they are not exactly annualized. What is available is price data for month on month. And then to get the annual annual average price will be to average across the prices for the months of the year. And so based on this data, we can actually see, and we already know from this month to this month, this is the season of the year. These are the activities that are going on in terms of agricultural activities. And so using the price data, we can look at what seasonal factors may be going on and see if this occurs every year or if maybe there are just some years that something happened. Regarding the question around the next line of analysis, data relating to food vendors' activity and how this impacts affordability. So actually this, the cost of a healthy diet is sort of like an entry point for a lot of things. We are starting here to see how the cost of a healthy diet varies across the country and affordability varies for population groups. But then we can't stop here. To be able to actually design interventions and policies, it's going to require talking to actors across the food system. So once we have information that this is where costs are high, this is where affordability is low, then we need to actually go a step further. And this is also where the research and academia community and even other stakeholders come in to find out why are these costs high and why is unaffordability low. So talking to food vendors to understand what's the factors that affect the flow of food from maybe places where costs are low to places where costs are high will be some of the activities we would undertake at a later point in time. But we can't design those studies yet until we see what comes out from this monitoring of prices that we're doing. And then this is similar to the role that food preservation techniques and post-harvest loss reductions can play in stabilizing food prices. We will be able to better understand this once we understand itself how the cost of a healthy diet and unaffordability is changing. And even though we know that, yes, it does play a role, we don't have enough information about it to be able to say this is exactly the role it's playing in different parts of the country. Okay, I guess I saw a question in chat box that is the private sector holding back for some value chains for nutritious foods due to production costs. That's honestly, it's also one of the things that we'll have to find out if or when we see how the cost of a healthy diet and cost of specific food groups are changing. These are some of the information that will be good to have. Why are these costs this way and what can we do to reduce them and also increase affordability? Thank you.
Somebody has a question that will the removal of fuel subsidy increase the cost of food items? It's a very funny one. So go ahead and answer.
Okay, so one of the things that the costs we presented here are the costs of the food itself. We know from other studies that the cost of transportation to the market to buy food can affect the cost to the household. So what we have here, we use cost from the market, the cost of the food, but the actual cost to the, and that's because we're looking at what is the least cost. So for instance, if I live close to the market, how much would I need? But once you start to factor in fuel costs, transportation costs, and even the cost of cooking, all of this goes into the costs of what the food, the cost of the healthy diet at the household level, and would affect whether or not the household buys certain food items. So for instance, if I know that I cannot afford the fuel to cook beans, cowpeas, I'm not going to buy it no matter how cheap it is. And then if the market is too far away, the market that sells vegetables or fruits is going to cost me, for instance, I just want to buy enough fruits for 2 or 3 days, but the transportation costs are going to be higher than the cost of the fruits and vegetables I want to buy. I'm not going to buy them. So definitely we know that these costs play a role, but where do they play a role and how do they play a role in specific locations? Those are things we do not know, and we will need to study for that. Thank you.
I don't know whether any of the other panelists want to comment or provide further answers, but I see a question here for Daniel, and the question is, can you confirm the period of research that you presented?
Yeah. And also maybe that will be also related to the first question on the price, whether it was analyzed. So the period of research was between September 2018 to September 2019. So the data was collected over a period of 1 year. So I cannot say much about availability, but in terms of prices, we have deflators for the time, as well as spatial as well as time deflator. So prices as if households would be treated as if they were interviewed at the same period of time. So prices has been standardized or deflated, so that we'll be able to evaluate them as if they were being evaluated at the same time or months.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And there is a question that says, is it even possible to regulate the food market in Nigeria by the government? And also somebody would like to know the factors that causes increase in food prices, because the person noted that sometimes, even when all these foods are in season, they are still costly. So I don't know, any of the panelists, Anna, Daniel, Tayo, over to you.
I am sure that Tayo has more expertise in this, but I would just make a general comment that I don't think the main suggestion is really about regulation. It is in this, I mean, regulation in my mind comes into play when we're talking about cheap prices of unhealthy ultra-processed foods and how they can be marketed. But what we're talking about in terms of access to healthy foods, this is really an issue of leveling the playing field so that there is greater attention to research and development around accessing and making more available these more perishable nutritious items. That's really an issue. I know it's been emphasized a few times by various speakers today that losses and perishability are a really big issue in not only just not only having the items available in markets, but even as an incentive for smallholders to produce these items. If they're going to rot or spoil before they can get them to market, why would they invest their time in producing them. So if we don't have solutions to kind of losses and market connectivity, it's going to be harder to increase productivity and increase availability. And I also wanted to come back to a point that Tayo was making about other costs, right? Like the cost to get to market and the cost of cooking. These are really important because we haven't been able to factor this in. Of course, we look at the cost per kilogram in the market, and that's it, because that's what the data tell us. It's a little bit harder to identify consistently what it actually costs people to access that food, but it's totally reasonable and important to think about those things as well. I'll paste into the chat a paper where we did look at the cooking costs and found that in some cases, you know, like a can of beans was actually lower cost than dried beans because of the cost of fuel that it took to cook those dried beans. So it's a really interesting consideration that I think needs more research. That kind of data is not so immediately accessible for monitoring, but it's certainly something to think about in terms of what can be done to improve access.
Thank you, Anna. Daniel, Tayo, do you want to say something about the questions? Because those are the questions we have, except, oh, okay, so there are some, this is not a question. Somebody said there is a need for more enlightenment on consumption of healthy diets in the areas where the costs are low. Or somebody asks a question, how do you determine the quantity of a healthy diet? And also to Anna, Kwav says, thanks for your important clarification above that the private sector includes smallholder farmers. We need to be aware of this when promoting private sector engagement to fill supply gaps. Smallholder farmers may commercialize, but mainly towards staple food production that doesn't improve the availability of nutritious foods. This is a point that was made in a recent IFRI policy brief on transforming Nigeria's agri-food system. So please check the chat box for the link to that document.
Thanks, Kwao. That's a really important point. And kind of back to, you know, in the times that I have talked with smallholder farmers in rural Africa. I've never been to Nigeria, but in other places in Africa where I've spent time with farmers, it becomes obvious why people are not growing more nutritious items. There's a lot of risk involved, especially again with the perishability, you know, and there's, for many farming households, there's no room for that kind of risk to invest in something that might not bring back income. So thanks for re-emphasizing the point about engaging with smallholder producers and producer organizations. Very important question that was raised about the quantity of a healthy diet. As Dr. McConan said, that we have a level of about 2,300 calories per day. And that was determined simply based on kind of the average calorie needs across the population. It turns out to be the amount of calories needed by an average adult active woman, but it's also the average across the population when we're considering men, women, old, young. It's about 2,300. So of course, for some people, it needs to be more. And in that case, for those individuals, the cost would be higher. And in some, for other people, the calories required per day would be lower. But this is an average that we use to look at the average cost in the population for a healthy diet.
Thank you, Anna. Rachel, you can give, you can allow the person that has the hand up to talk. Over to you, Rachel.
Great, yeah, Okuma, I think you have your hand up, so I've just unmuted you, and you can feel free to ask your question or make your comment now. Unless that was a false hand.
Seems maybe he or she is unable to unmute, but there is a question for Anna here, but I think I'll be the one to answer it. He said, Anna, what do you suggest be done urgently to the current national food-based dietary guidelines, since you said it does not contain adequate information on serving sizes? So I said I would answer because we've already started the process for revising this. We have engaged with the people that are going to help us. So just look forward. We were told that maybe it won't be ready in the next 2 years, but we'll keep pushing until then. So, so Tayo and Daniel, I was asking if you had other comments because we don't have further questions. Tayo, do you want to go first? Or Daniel?
No, just one small comment. So in our next step of this research, we'll be looking into what factors might contribute to the cost or affordability of healthy diet. So this the first step was to see how the status, and then the next step we'll be examining, which factors would contribute to either the cost or affordability. So just so I don't have any answer to that. What are the causes? But we're definitely looking into it in the next step of the research. That's all.
Tayo.
Okay, thank you, Ma. I just wanted to make a comment about the question that is it possible to regulate the food market in Nigeria by government? I'm not an economist, and I am likely to say this wrong, but I know from the few economics classes I've taken, I know that the general perception is that the government should not even be getting involved in the in regulating markets unless there's a problem. And so that if you leave but there's a classic economic theory that if you leave markets and all things being equal, and there's enough competition in the markets, that you'll find out that prices will be low because of competition, and quality will be high because there are so many players that are buying and many players are selling. And so everyone is trying to get people to buy their products, and that the needs of everyone will be automatically met. The point I'm trying to make here is that this analysis is not to get government to regulate food markets. What the government needs to do is to ensure that there's an enabling environment, that we do not have some people who are unable to afford healthy diets because of factors beyond their control. And so if people are unable to earn living wages because of we don't have our policies right, then it doesn't matter how low the cost of a healthy diet is, they are just not going to be able to afford it. That is a place in which governments can intervene. It's not intervening in the market itself. Again, if the cost of production is so prohibitively high for smallholder farmers that there's nothing they do, they're just not going to be able to make a profit. Or like Anna mentioned, if the cost of fuel is so high that there are some foods that people are just not going to be able to consume because the other costs make it prohibitive, then it doesn't matter what else, even if the market was free and all of that, we will still have challenges. And so the role of government in this case is to identify these factors that will not interfere with the smooth running of markets in a sense, but will increase the efficiency and effectiveness of our markets. And so smallholder farmers, for instance, we import a lot of fertilizer, for instance, that's one area, which when Forex goes up, then the cost of fertilizer goes up, and then the cost of smallholder farmers producing go up, and then they're unable to make meaningful profits from their products. I don't know, my IFRI colleagues will probably be able to say this better, but these are some of the things we expect government to intervene in, not really regulating the food markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a question here. The person has written it twice, but I thought that was the whole essence of the webinar. The question is, how does food prices affect nutrition and healthy diets in the society? So I also want to add the other one. Somebody is saying that how or what do you think about promoting home gardening in respect to the new initiative launched by the Vice President, Operation Feed Yourself, and how will it, or how can it affect food prices in general? And then the last one here is, to what extent are consumers choosing low-cost options? Should innovation expand prices of low-cost healthy foods, or expand range of mid-price options that are in the more demand for consumers? So I think I would ask Anna to go first, then Tayo, then Daniel. Over to you, Anna.
These are excellent questions. I think the point on home gardening is a good one to raise. We're talking about prices in the market, but also understanding that there needs to be a longer term improvement in market integration so that people are able to get to markets easily and find low-cost foods in those markets. And when that doesn't happen, a more immediate solution may be to increase people's capacity to grow the food items which are too expensive. Of course, there's a cost to growing things as well. But I know personally that, when I have a little vegetable garden, I'm much more likely to eat vegetables that day if I didn't have time to go to the store and I didn't already have them in my kitchen. So I think that it's an important component of thinking in holistic terms about access to healthy diets, is both the market prices and also home production. And then safety nets, that safety net programs for people who cannot afford these diets. There are, implications for the level of cash transfers that could be considered, but also in-kind transfers like, vegetable seeds, for example, could be one component of even social safety nets. I think Tom also brings up an excellent point about, innovation around low cost and mid-price options. It's a little hard to identify exactly what those are because the prices shift. There are, as Daniel pointed out in his presentation, there are a set of items that are consistently low price. But in general, I think it's useful to think mainly in terms of the food groups, because as far as fruits and vegetables and legumes, prices often move pretty closely together. So looking at, the fact that we've, revealed here of the general costs for those food groups are high, means maybe not necessarily prioritizing one type of species, but just looking at the commonalities among, how to improve access to these foods in general, what's happening in the supply side that is causing problems for raising prices for these kinds of foods. And also for the animal source foods, actually animal source foods probably shouldn't ever be as cheap as plant source foods because they are more resource intensive to produce. But having a view of how can those animal source foods be made more available to lower income groups that wouldn't usually be able to spend their income on those more high cost foods, again, thinking about home production options or ways that, you know, it can be those items that are mid-price and in more demand in terms of animal source foods can be accessible in a sustainable way to the lower income segment of society. I think I'll stop there, and other aspects of these questions my fellow speakers can address.
Tayo, over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, ma'am. I just want to make a comment about the Operation Feed Yourself by the Vice President. Actually, what we found with the analysis that was done is that the data actually supports this initiative, that if households are able to produce some of their own food, particularly the high unaffordability of vegetables, for instance. So if people were able to produce their own vegetables, that will increase the affordability of a healthy diet. It may not, depending on so many factors, it may not affect the prices in the market, but definitely household level affordability, like Anna also mentioned, will be improved. And I would like to point everyone to the policy note that was developed for this event, because that was one of the points that we made, that the findings actually support the operation. We didn't name it, but it's the Operation Feed Yourself program that has just been initiated. The findings supports the importance of the program. Thank you.
Daniel, over to you.
Yes. Based on my readings, home gardening, yeah, they improve healthy diets, healthy diet consumption from my readings from other studies. So that's what I could say. In terms of price, yes, they from looking into the data, I've seen that for most people, for lower income people, they tend to spend more on lower nutritious foods. So price matters for consuming, but that's not the whole story, because I've also looked into in a different research that higher income households tend to consume also processed foods, highly processed foods. So there is another side of the coin. Income matters, prices also matter. So there is also behavioral issue, not necessarily the price. Yeah.
So I want to give each of the panelists maybe a minute each for final comments, and then I will just reiterate the key messages again, because we have only 6 minutes to go. So we start with Daniel at this time, then to Tayo, and then Anna takes the last one. Over, Daniel.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to add. I'm just happy to be part of the team. Thanks.
Tayo.
Yes, I also don't have any additional comments, except to thank everyone for joining the webinar today and for staying with us till this time. Thank you.
Yeah, Anna.
I would like to say I found the state level analysis and all of the comments here today by everyone extremely insightful. And I'm just so pleased at this discussion today, because when we started this project back in 2015, this was exactly the kind of discussion and outcome that we hoped for, to and use this metric to shine a light on affordability and inadequate access to healthy diets. And like the very first speaker from FMARD noted, nutrition education is often used as a solution to help people to eat better diets. But we can see that that solution will not be effective if people simply can't afford what they're being told to consume. So having this discussion about what are the structural constraints in Nigeria to people actually accessing healthy diets, and how and where and when can we take action, and involving the different the different players within the government and programs in the country, I think we can really start to make positive changes for people to have true food security and have better, healthier lives because of it. So thank you to everyone for these very insightful points and messages, and really looking forward to the collaboration going forward to continue this work together.
Yeah, thank you very much to our panelists. I just want to share a few of the key messages. And the first is that the least cost diets provide a conservative estimate of the cost per day based on the cheapest foods available at a given time and place of foods that meet the criteria of a given diet. And secondly, that from the analysis done, 31% of households in Nigeria using the 2018-19 survey results, 31% of households were unable to afford a healthy diet at that time. And from the things that have happened since then, it's likely that that figure may have risen to about 50%, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. And also it was found that fruits were the most expensive in the northern zones and animal source foods in the southern zones. The policy implication, I'm just going to read as is written in the brief, is having these metrics available will give Nigeria's decision makers a realistic picture of state level priorities for interventions in areas such as trade, social protection, and agriculture, and for shaping food systems transformation pathways towards healthier diets, and to mitigate drivers of malnutrition in times of crisis. Recurring monitoring with shorter time intervals of the cost of a healthy diet and other relevant indicators is essential for evidence-based policymaking. At this point, I want to also add that the recurring information on the cost of healthy diet is going to be part of the information that people can get from the food systems dashboard that is being developed. And I hope that in a very short time, we'll be asking you to join us again for a webinar for us to introduce the food systems dashboard that is being developed in Nigeria. To our presenters, Tayo, Adeyemi, Daniel, and to Anna, a very big thank you. And to Rachel for all the work in the background, thank you very much. To my colleagues at the Nutrition and Food Safety Division of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, I want to say that you are the best, because the government system does not really give a lot of impetus for people to be involved in this, but you are doing your best, and I know that we are going somewhere to happen. Thank you to our participants. Thank you for joining us. I do hope you have enjoyed yourself and learned a lot. Please feel free, read the policy documents and reach out to our presenters as you have questions. It's 2:30 Nigerian time. We've come to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for being a part of this. Thank you.